My name's Jack. I'm just a regular guy who's had his fair share of bad breaks. I used to be a cop in a small town, a job I was good at, even proud of, until everything went sideways. Long story short, I got caught in a situation that went south fast, and someone innocent paid the price. That mistake still keeps me up at night. I quit the force after that. Figured I wasn't cut out for it anymore. Life hasn't been easy since then. I bounced from job to job, security guard, delivery driver, handyman, whatever paid the bills. My ex-wife left a few years ago, and my teenage daughter, Chloe, stays with her most of the time. When she comes to visit, I do everything I can to make her feel at home, but it's hard. College is coming up, and I'm struggling to scrape together the cash for her future. That's why, when a buddy of mine told me about the night watchman gig at Red Haven Penitentiary, I didn't ask too many questions. The pay was good, way better than I expected for a job like this. The only catch: the prison's been abandoned for decades, and the place has a reputation. People in town say it's cursed. I don't believe in curses, though. Ghost stories don't pay the bills. I showed up on a cold Tuesday evening, figuring it'd be an easy job. The guy who trained me, Charlie, was an older man with jittery hands and a voice like gravel. He barely looked me in the eye the entire time we talked, which was weird. He walked me through the basics, where the keys were, how to use the security cameras, what doors to check, and where to park my truck. Then he handed me this laminated sheet of rules. "Take these seriously," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "This isn't your usual security job. Red Haven, it's different. These rules are the only thing keeping you safe." I wanted to laugh. Safe from what? I asked. Charlie just shook his head. "You'll find out soon enough." I looked down at the sheet. There were 10 rules, written in plain black ink. The rules of Red Haven. Rule 1. Lock every cell door before midnight, even if it was locked earlier. Double-check cell 13. "That one's been difficult to keep locked," Charlie muttered. Rule 2. Never enter the showers, no matter what you hear. They're still replaying their final moments. Rule 3. If you hear footsteps behind you, don't turn around until you've reached the exit. Looking back only invites them closer. Rule 4. Avoid cell block E at all costs. If you hear crying from there, don't acknowledge it. It's not what it sounds like. Rule 5. When walking past the warden's office, always knock twice before passing. Never enter. He doesn't like being ignored. Rule 6. At 1:30 a.m., inspect the mess hall. If the chairs are overturned, set them upright. If they're upright, leave immediately. This keeps the balance. Rule 7. If the alarms go off, stop whatever you're doing and stand completely still until they stop. Rule 8. Never stay in the surveillance room when the clock strikes 3 a.m. That's when they watch you. Rule 9. If you hear your name whispered, don't respond. Head straight to the exit and wait 5 minutes. Responding gives it power. Rule 10. Before leaving at the end of your shift, check the logbook. If the page is blank, you must stay. The book knows when the job isn't done. I looked back at Charlie. "You're kidding, right? This is just to scare me or something." Charlie's face was stone cold. "I've been here 20 years, kid. I've seen what happens when you break the rules. Just follow them. All of them. You'll be fine." My first night started uneventfully enough. The place was dead silent, no pun intended. Red Haven's got this eerie vibe, though. It's not just old, it's wrong. The air feels heavy, like the walls are holding onto something they shouldn't be. I started my rounds with the laminated sheet tucked into my pocket. The prison layout was simple enough. A few main blocks, the yard, the surveillance room, and the warden's office at the center. The first couple hours, I didn't notice anything out of the ordinary. The cells were empty, just rows of cold, iron bars and dusty floors. Around 11:45 p.m., I figured I'd get a jump on rule number 1. I started locking the cell doors, making sure every single one was secure. When I got to cell 13, though, I hesitated. Something about it felt off. The air was colder here, and the lock looked newer than the others, like someone had replaced it recently. I shook it off, locked the door, and moved on. By midnight, everything was locked, and I was feeling pretty good about myself. Easy money. Then I heard it. Footsteps. They were faint at first, echoing down the empty corridor behind me. I froze, my heart pounding. There wasn't supposed to be anyone else here. Charlie had said I'd be alone. Rule number 3 popped into my head. If you hear footsteps behind you, don't turn around until you've reached the exit. I gripped my flashlight tighter and started walking toward the main entrance, keeping my eyes forward. The footsteps followed me, slow and deliberate, like someone was matching my pace. By the time I reached the exit, the footsteps stopped. I turned around. Nothing. Just an empty hallway. Get it together, Jack, I muttered to myself. It's just an old building. Probably the pipes or something. But deep down, I wasn't so sure. I spent the rest of the night trying to shake off the feeling that I wasn't alone. Every creak, every gust of wind made me jump. When the clock struck 1:30 a.m., I made my way to the mess hall, like rule number 6 said. The chairs were overturned, just like they were supposed to be. I set them upright, one by one, and then I heard it again. Footsteps. This time, they were coming from the warden's office. The footsteps stopped just as I reached the corridor outside the warden's office. The door loomed at the end of the hall, its wood warped with age, and a brass plaque glinting faintly under my flashlight. Warden was engraved on it in bold letters, and the air around it felt wrong. Rule number 5. When walking past the warden's office, always knock twice before passing. Never enter. I stood there frozen, my pulse hammering in my ears. The footsteps I'd heard sounded like they had gone straight through that door, but the thought of knocking, of interacting with whatever was behind it, made my stomach churn. Just follow the rules, I whispered to myself. Knock and move on. I rapped my knuckles against the door twice, the sound echoing louder than I expected. I waited a second, then 2, and when nothing happened, I walked past as quickly as I could. But just as I reached the end of the corridor, I felt it. A cold draft swept past me, and from behind, the door creaked open. I didn't look back, I didn't need to. The sound of it opening was clear, the hinges groaning like something heavy was forcing them apart. My instincts screamed at me to run, but my legs felt like lead. I just stood there, gripping my flashlight so tight my fingers ached. Then I heard it. A low, gravelly voice, barely more than a whisper, called out from behind me. Jack! Rule number 9 hit me like a brick. If you hear your name whispered, don't respond. Head straight to the exit and wait 5 minutes. I didn't turn around. I didn't say a word. I forced my feet to move, one step at a time, until I was out of the building. I leaned against the cold metal of the exterior door, my heart threatening to burst out of my chest. I checked my watch. 5 minutes. The whisper didn't come again, but I didn't go back inside until the time was up. The rest of the shift passed in tense silence. I didn't hear any more footsteps, didn't see anything in the surveillance monitors. When my shift ended, I grabbed the logbook as instructed in rule number 10. The page wasn't blank. My shift had been logged, neat and clean, with the timestamp of my departure. Relief washed over me as I locked the main gate behind me. But as I climbed into my truck, I couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, had been watching me the entire time. My second shift started much the same as the first, though the unease from last night lingered like a dark cloud. The laminated sheet of rules was practically glued to my hand now. Every step I took, every door I checked, I ran the rules over and over in my head like a mantra. By midnight, I'd locked all the cells again, double-checking cell 13. Everything seemed normal, if you could call patrolling an abandoned prison normal. But as the clock ticked toward 1 a.m., I found myself near cell block E, the one place Charlie had specifically told me to avoid. Rule number 4, avoid cell block E at all costs. If you hear crying from there, don't acknowledge it. I didn't plan to go near it, but something pulled me in that direction. I told myself it was just curiosity. I wanted to see for myself what all the fuss was about. But deep down, it felt like something else was leading me there. The first thing I noticed was the temperature. The air was colder in Block E, colder than anywhere else in the prison. My breath fogged up in front of me, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. Then I heard it. Crying. It was faint at first, barely audible, like someone trying to stifle their sobs. But as I walked deeper into the block, it grew louder, echoing off the walls. It sounded like a woman, her voice raw and broken, the kind of crying that comes from deep, unbearable pain. I stopped in my tracks. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to turn around and leave, but I couldn't move. The sound was magnetic, pulling me closer. "Hello!" I called out before I could stop myself. The crying stopped. The silence that followed was suffocating, like the air itself had been sucked out of the room. My flashlight flickered, and in that brief moment of darkness, I heard something new: footsteps. They were soft, shuffling, and getting closer. I backed away slowly, my heart hammering in my chest. My flashlight came back on just in time to catch a glimpse of something, or someone, at the end of the corridor. It was a figure, hunched and shadowy, standing in front of one of the cells. "Who's there?" I demanded, my voice shaking. The figure didn't respond. Instead, it tilted its head as if studying me. Then, in a voice that sounded like gravel scraping against metal, it whispered, "Jack." My blood ran cold. Rule number 9. If you hear your name whispered, don't respond. Head straight to the exit and wait 5 minutes. I didn't think. I just turned and ran. The footsteps followed me, growing louder and faster with every step I took. I didn't look back, didn't dare, not until I burst out into the open air of the prison yard. I waited by the exit, counting down the seconds on my watch. The footsteps stopped just before I reached the gate, and the night fell eerily silent again. When I finally went back inside, cell block E was empty. No sign of the figure, no sign of anyone. But the crying started again, faint and distant as I walked away. By my third shift, I was starting to question my sanity. Everything about Red Haven felt alive in the worst possible way, like the walls, the air, and even the shadows were watching me. I couldn't shake the thought of the hunched figure from cell block E, or the voice that whispered my name. But I couldn't afford to quit. Chloe's tuition didn't care about ghosts or rules, and I was running out of options. That night, I made it a point to avoid cell block E entirely. Instead, I focused on my rounds. I locked every cell door, making absolutely sure that cell 13 was secure. I didn't hear any footsteps this time, but the oppressive silence felt almost worse. At 1:30 a.m., I headed for the mess hall, already anticipating rule number 6. At 1:30 a.m., inspect the mess hall. If the chairs are overturned, set them upright. If they're upright, leave immediately. The mess hall was a cavernous space with long, battered tables and a flickering overhead light that barely illuminated the room. As I stepped inside, the hairs on my arms prickled. The air smelled faintly of rot, and my footsteps echoed unnaturally, like the sound was bouncing off something unseen. The chairs were overturned, just like the night before. Relief washed over me. At least the rule was clear. I moved quickly, flipping the chairs upright one by one. Each scrape of wood against the floor sent shivers down my spine. But halfway through, I noticed something strange. The overturned chairs, there were too many of them. The night before, there had been maybe 10 chairs. Tonight, it was at least 20. And as I moved to the next table, I could swear I heard the faint sound of breathing. I froze, my hands gripping the back of a chair. "Hello!" I called out, my voice echoing in the empty room. No response. I glanced around, my flashlight sweeping the shadows. Nothing. Just rows of tables and overturned chairs. I forced myself to keep going, flipping the rest of the chairs upright as quickly as I could. When I finished, I stood in the middle of the room waiting. My heart was pounding so hard it hurt. Suddenly, the light above me flickered, plunging the room into brief darkness. In that instant, I heard the sound of chairs scraping against the floor behind me. I whipped around, my flashlight cutting through the darkness. Every chair I had just set upright was overturned again. Rule number 6 flashed in my mind like a warning siren. If the chairs are overturned, set them upright. If they're upright, leave immediately. I backed out of the room, keeping my flashlight trained on the tables. The moment I stepped into the hallway, the door slammed shut behind me with enough force to rattle the walls. I didn't go back to the mess hall for the rest of the night. By the fourth night, the unease had settled into a routine. I knew the rules by heart now, and I clung to them like a lifeline. The laminated sheet never left my pocket, and every time I unlocked a door, I felt like I was buying myself a little more time. The first part of the shift went smoothly, or as smoothly as it could in a place like Red Haven. I locked the cells, avoided cell block E, and knocked twice on the warden's office door. But as the clock ticked closer to 3 a.m., I found myself in the surveillance room, staring at the monitors. Rule number 8. Never stay in the surveillance room when the clock strikes 3 a.m. I'd been careful to avoid breaking this one before, but tonight, something caught my attention on the monitors. One of the cameras, fixed on the main corridor near cell block E, was flickering. Through the static, I saw something move. It was quick, barely a shadow, but it was there. I leaned closer, squinting at the screen. The figure appeared again, clearer this time. It was the same hunched form I'd seen 2 nights ago. It moved down the hallway in jerky, unnatural steps, like it didn't quite know how to use its legs. Then it stopped. It turned toward the camera, its head tilting in that same, unnatural way. My blood ran cold as its face came into view. It wasn't a face at all. It was a dark, empty void, a hollow space where a person's features should have been. The clock on the wall clicked loudly, pulling my attention away. It was 2:59 a.m. I jumped to my feet, my heart racing. The camera feed flickered again, and when I looked back, the figure was gone. The walls around me began to creak, a slow, groaning sound that seemed to come from deep within the building. The air felt heavier, thicker, like it was pressing down on me. Rule number 8. Never stay in the surveillance room when the clock strikes 3 a.m. I bolted for the door, but as my hand reached the knob, the monitors lit up. Every screen was filled with the same figure, the hollow-faced creature from cell block E, standing in different parts of the prison. They were everywhere. The creaking grew louder, almost deafening, and I felt something cold brush against the back of my neck. I yanked the door open and stumbled into the hallway, slamming it shut behind me. The sound stopped instantly. When I finally dared to look back, the door to the surveillance room was rattling, as if something was trying to get out. I didn't go back in there for the rest of the shift. The 5th night started quietly, too quietly. For the first time since I began this job, the oppressive air of Red Haven seemed to lift. There were no footsteps, no whispers, no overturned chairs. Even cell block E was silent when I passed it. I should have known it was the calm before the storm. By 2 a.m., I was in the east wing, double-checking that all the cells were locked. The keys jingled in my hand as I walked, and my footsteps echoed down the long, empty corridors. Everything felt unnaturally still, as though the prison itself was holding its breath. Then the alarms went off. The sound was deafening, a shrill, ear-piercing wail that reverberated through the halls. My first instinct was panic. I hadn't even known the place had working alarms. But as I fumbled with my flashlight, rule number 7 flashed in my mind. If the alarms go off, stop whatever you're doing and stand completely still until they stop. I froze. The noise was unbearable, like nails on a chalkboard amplified 100 times. I clenched my teeth, trying to resist the urge to cover my ears, and kept my flashlight pointed at the ground. Seconds stretched into minutes, and the alarms didn't stop. The longer I stood there, the harder it became to stay still. My muscles ached, and the urge to move, to do something, was almost overwhelming. Then I heard it, a voice, low and distorted, cutting through the wail of the alarms. "Help me!" It was close, far too close, and my heart nearly stopped. Rule number 9 came crashing into my mind. If you hear your name whispered, don't respond. Head straight to the exit and wait 5 minutes. But they hadn't said my name. Not yet. I clenched the flashlight tighter, my hands trembling. The voice came again, clearer this time. "Jack, help me." My legs felt like jelly, but I didn't move. I didn't speak. The alarms cut off abruptly, plunging the prison into an eerie, suffocating silence. I could hear my own ragged breathing, the pounding of my heart, but nothing else. When I finally dared to lift my flashlight, I saw it, a figure standing at the end of the corridor, shrouded in shadow. It was hunched, its head tilted unnaturally, just like the thing from cell block E. But this time it didn't wait. It started moving toward me, its steps slow and deliberate. I didn't think. I bolted. I ran through the corridors, the sound of its footsteps echoing behind me. I didn't stop until I reached the main exit, slamming the heavy door shut and collapsing against it. For the rest of the night, I stayed outside, watching the prison from the safety of my truck. I wasn't sure how much more I could take. The things I'd seen, the rules I'd followed, they didn't just feel like precautions anymore. They felt like warnings, like desperate attempts to keep something contained. By the sixth night, I needed answers. The laminated sheet of rules didn't tell me anything about why they existed, and Charlie's cryptic comments weren't enough. So I did the only thing I could think of. I went to the archives. The archives were located in the basement, a maze of dusty shelves and filing cabinets that hadn't been touched in decades. It wasn't part of my usual rounds, and the rules didn't specifically mention it. But as I descended the creaky metal stairs, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was breaking some unspoken law. The air down there was thick and stale, and the faint smell of mildew hung in the air. My flashlight beam swept over rows of crumbling files and faded labels, and I started searching for anything that might explain what was happening at Red Haven. After what felt like an eternity, I found a box labeled Incident Reports, 1987. The date caught my eye. It was the same year the prison had officially shut down. I flipped through the reports, my fingers trembling. Most of them were mundane, fights between inmates, staff injuries, but one report stood out. It was handwritten, scrawled in messy, frantic letters. Inmate 13 is no longer contained. We've sealed cell 13, but it's not enough. He walks the halls at night, whispering to the others. They follow him now. We can't keep him locked away, not anymore. A chill ran down my spine. Inmate 13. The same cell I'd been instructed to check every night. I dug deeper, pulling out another file. This one was a staff memo, dated just days before the prison's closure. All personnel are to follow the emergency protocol effective immediately. Do not respond to the whispers. Do not acknowledge the crying. Do not enter the warden's office. The rules are the only thing keeping him contained. I sat back on my heels, my mind racing. The rules weren't for my protection. They were to keep whatever he was, inmate 13, from escaping. A loud crash shattered the silence, and my flashlight flickered. I spun around, my heart pounding, but the basement was empty. Then I heard it. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming from the stairs. The footsteps echoed louder with every passing second. My body froze, crouched between rows of dusty shelves, the flashlight shaking in my hand. My mind raced through the rules, searching for something, anything, that would guide me. But rule number 10 was all I could cling to. Never, under any circumstances, enter the warden's office unless the emergency lights are on. The emergency lights weren't on. The footsteps stopped at the base of the stairs. I gripped the flashlight tighter, the beam trained on the floor. My breath was shallow, my heart pounding so loudly, I thought it would give me away. Then the whispers began. "Jack, you can't keep hiding. Jack." It was the same distorted voice I'd heard before, low and haunting, like it was being dragged through static. My stomach twisted as the whispers grew louder, echoing off the concrete walls. I didn't wait to see what was coming. I bolted for the stairs, taking them two at a time, the sound of my footsteps blending with the whispers. I didn't look back, I couldn't. When I reached the main floor, the prison was eerily quiet. I stood there for a moment, catching my breath, when something caught my eye. The warden's office door was open. A faint, flickering light spilled out into the corridor. My stomach churned as I stepped closer, the weight of the rules pressing down on me. The emergency lights weren't on, but the door was open, almost inviting me inside. I hesitated at the threshold, shining my flashlight into the room. It was smaller than I expected, cluttered with papers and a single old desk. On the wall hung a large, cracked mirror, the glass smeared with something dark. In the middle of the room sat a chair, its back to me, and in that chair something was sitting. It was hunched over, its shoulders rising and falling like it was breathing. My instincts screamed at me to run, but I couldn't move. The thing in the chair slowly turned its head, revealing a face I couldn't comprehend. It wasn't human, not anymore. Its hollow eyes locked onto mine, and I felt a crushing weight, like it was pulling me into the room. The door slammed shut behind me. I don't know how long I stood there, paralyzed, staring into those empty eyes. The room felt like it was collapsing around me, the walls pressing closer and closer. Then, the thing in the chair spoke. "You shouldn't have come here, Jack." Its voice was a blend of whispers and screams, an inhuman sound that rattled my bones. I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came out. The figure rose from the chair, its movements unnatural, like it was being pulled by invisible strings. It pointed to the mirror on the wall. "Look," it commanded. Every instinct told me not to, but my body moved on its own. I turned toward the mirror, my flashlight beam illuminating the smeared glass. At first, I saw only my own reflection, wide-eyed, pale, and terrified. Then the image shifted. The prison appeared in the mirror, but it wasn't the Red Haven I knew. The walls were crumbling, the floors covered in blood. Shadows moved in the corridors, and in the center of it all stood inmate 13. But it wasn't just him. It was me. I was standing there, dressed in the same tattered uniform, my eyes hollow and lifeless. My reflection turned to face me, a twisted smile spreading across its face. "Now you understand," the thing behind me whispered. "The rules weren't to protect you. They were to keep you from becoming one of us." The room began to spin, the walls melting away until I was standing in the middle of the prison. Only it wasn't the Red Haven I'd known. It was the nightmare version from the mirror. The rules were gone. The laminated sheet, my flashlight, even the keys, all gone. Around me, the shadows began to move, taking shape. Figures emerged from the darkness, their faces hollow and twisted. They were the inmates, but they weren't human anymore. Inmate 13 stepped forward, his hollow eyes boring into mine. "You've taken my place, Jack. This prison needs a warden." "No," I whispered, backing away. "I followed the rules. I did everything right." The figures closed in, their whispers growing louder and louder. "You can't leave," Inmate 13 said, his voice a low growl. "You never could." I don't remember how I got out of the prison that night. All I know is that I woke up in my truck, parked outside the gates. The sun was rising, and the laminated sheet of rules was sitting on the passenger seat, smeared with blood. I drove home, quit the job, and swore I'd never go back. But Red Haven didn't let me go. Every night, I dream of the prison. The whispers follow me wherever I go, and I can still see the hollow eyes of inmate 13 in every reflection. And the rules? They've started showing up in other places. Scrawled on bathroom mirrors, carved into wooden tables, even whispered in my own voice. I think Red Haven is waiting for me to return. And deep down, I know it's only a matter of time before I do. If you ever find yourself walking the halls of an old, abandoned prison at night, and you hear footsteps behind you, don't turn around. And for God's sake, never, ever enter the warden's office. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more chilling tales.